Welcome to A Well Cared For Human, the podcast that tries to convince you that you are 100% normal and an even better than okay example of the human species, despite the fact that sometimes we feel like the craziest, most incapable, or worthless creatures on the face of this planet. I'm Kory, an author, a creative, and the host of the show. Whatever you're bringing to the table today, I hope this episode proves to be a dose of inspiration for you on your quest to become a well-cared-for human. You can find the episode show notes, your free wellness blueprint, and more at awellcaredforhuman.com. And as always, thank you for listening. Hello humans, it's your host Kory, and this episode almost didn't happen, or at least it was going to be very late. And why? Because I woke up yesterday morning with a fever blister. Let's get in nice and close so you can see this disfigurement on my face. And so I didn't want to get on camera because I was like, oh, it's so embarrassing, getting fever blisters. I've had them all of my life, ever since I was a little kid, and so it's just something I've had to learn to deal with, but I always tried to kind of avoid people or social situations when I have them. I don't really wear makeup, as you can probably tell, and so I am not someone who would try to cover it, and also because they're usually pretty painful, and so just putting something on top of it is just not really the route I want to go. And so I was like, I don't want to get on camera. And then I was like, you know what? Actually, this is a great opportunity to talk about embarrassment. So this week, we're going to talk about embarrassment, what it is, how to work with it, why it happens to us. My experiences with embarrassment are frequent, like most people. All throughout my life, there have been different things that have happened that have been quite embarrassing. A few of the more innocuous ones that come to me off the top of my head is one time when I was teaching, I went in with a full, thermoses of coffee in the morning, and I sat it down on the desk, and I don't like drinking through the plastic lids because it's kind of gross. It has that plastic taste to it, and it just ruins the coffee for me. So I took the lid off when I set it on the desk, and then immediately I turned to say something to a student, and I turned back and knocked the coffee over, all over my papers, the computer, my clothes. And more importantly, this was happening as I was being evaluated, so there was another person in the room who was observing me when this happened, and I was so embarrassed not to just be covered in coffee and have to also spill coffee all over my things, but also to have more witnesses than usual. It would have already been embarrassing just for my students to see it, but it was even more so because I was being evaluated by this other person. She was really sweet about it after the fact. She was like, this is not a big deal, I'm not even going to include it in my report, and I was like, okay, and as I'm covered in coffee and probably very clearly on the verge of tears. I was a pretty young teacher at the time, and so later in my teaching career, whenever I was spilling coffee all over myself, I probably was just like, can somebody get me some paper towels from the bathroom? But early, especially because I had only been a teacher for probably a year or two, I was still very conscious of the fact that I was new to it, that maybe I wasn't as good as the other teachers, that I was still learning a lot about being a teacher, and so it was definitely more embarrassing. In a very similar vein, also back when I was teaching, for those of you who don't know, I was a professor before I became a full-time author. I had taught writing and communication classes, and specifically creative writing and composition, and so that had all happened for like 10 years before I became a full-time author. And so these stories are from that time of my life. There was one day when I was walking from one building, one class to another, and I slipped. The floor had clearly just been like polished or something, and I was wearing these dress flats, which don't really go well with me anyway, because I have a tendency to scoop my feet because I don't trust floors. It's something I'm still working on, but I slid completely in like a front split, which I've never done in any other context in my life, so I don't even know how it happened, but I just went completely boop, and I was wearing a skirt at the time. I was knee length, fortunately it wasn't too short, but I just boop, and before I could decide how I was going to handle this situation, fortunately, a very nice gentleman was like, oh my gosh, do you need help? And I was like, yes. And so I took his hand and he helped me stand back up. And I was like, oh my gosh, how embarrassing. And he was like, it looked very graceful. And I think he was just trying to be nice to me, but it did. I just like perfectly split skirt spread around me, and he helped me right back up. But I have fallen other times in which obviously it was not at all graceful like that. It just face plant in front of whomever is there. And so I think this happens to everybody, in which we do things in front of others and we are very aware of maybe how they perceived it or what we looked like or how bad it might have made us look in the moment. And so these are all examples of embarrassment. I'm sure you have your own, you have many, and I'm sharing these with you not because they're comfortable for me, but just to remind you that embarrassing experiences happen to all of us. And there are things that we can do to work with that terrible feeling of embarrassment so that it doesn't become something bigger, something actually unhealthy or destructive. And then also to kind of, I don't want to say get more comfortable with necessarily, but just learn how to relax with difficult emotions, because embarrassment is just another difficult emotion that we will experience. And so embarrassment happens to all of us. What do we want to do with it? How do we work with it? Well, first of all, it helps to remember that embarrassment is completely natural. There is not a human on this planet who has not experienced embarrassment, including my dog, who is now huffing. So there's not a creature on the planet who's not experienced embarrassment. Secondly, there is an awareness that comes with it. So the actual definition of embarrassment is to be hyper-focused on others. So if you imagine other people seeing you in a certain way, perceiving you in a certain way, that is where the embarrassment comes from. So you're like, oh my God, what did they think when they saw me do this? Or, oh my goodness, what's going to happen from that? Are they going to ridicule me? Are they going to laugh at me? Are they going to tell everyone? And so there's this experience of what others think of me. And so embarrassment is just one more flavor of that, because there are many instances in which we worry about others' perceptions of us. And so if you're worried about someone else's perceptions of you, you can work with the same tactics you use for that as you do with embarrassment. So when you realize that you're caring too much about what other people think of you, what do you do to self-soothe? Do you have some positive self-talk? Do you pump yourself up? Do you have mantras? Are you like, it doesn't matter what other people think of me, it only matters what I think of myself? Do you speak to yourself in that way? Or do you have like a journal activity that you like to do when you're like, well, this and this happened, but you know what? I'm not going to let that stop me. I'm not going to let that get to me. Do you have like a way to process it in written form maybe, or having a little conversation with yourself? Do you work with that in meditation? So Tonglen meditation is one that I would use personally. So sitting with that difficult feeling, reminding myself that this is universal as far as humans go. Everyone's experiencing this hyper awareness, this concern about what others think. And so what can I do to sit with that difficult emotion, to ventilate it, to make it break its hold on me, that kind of thing. And so it's not so different in that context. Embarrassment can also teach us how to be compassionate to others. So we know that we're not the only ones who have ever done embarrassing things. And so when we see other people in embarrassing situations as an opportunity, just like these examples that I shared, in which someone can reach out and make it less terrible for someone else, because we know. Also to keep us humble, because we know that we're not the only ones who's ever going to make mistakes. And so just being kinder, more compassionate people. It also can help us to practice all the things that I mentioned before when we're working with a similar difficult emotion. So just like I said in the beginning, that embarrassment is just another form of being too concerned about the perceptions of others. We have an opportunity when we're embarrassed to practice those meditation practices, practice those journal exercises, practice those positive self-talk mantras, any of those things that help us to have that loving connection with ourselves, to be positive and supportive of ourselves. So imagine that you had a child or a best friend, or maybe you do have a child and hopefully a best friend. If they came to you and they told you this really embarrassing story, what would you do to make them feel better? Would you laugh with them about it? Would you cheer them up? Would you try to redirect their attention to something else? Because that's all meditation is, right? Redirecting our attention. So if I was meditating with the feeling of embarrassment, for example, and I just kept going on and over in my mind like, oh my gosh, like how did this happen? Why me? You know, if I just kept being hyper-focused on it. Meditation is just bringing your attention back to something that's not that. So you'd be sitting in your meditation posture, the terrible memory of what you did would come up, and you would just practice letting it go. Because embarrassment is good for practicing to let it go, not obsess about it. So another opportunity then to practice letting go. And so you see the embarrassing thing and you're like, no, nope, not going to think about that. So to just keep returning to that focus point rather than being obsessed with the embarrassing thing that happened. And so your mind will naturally gravitate back toward it, because we all do. But then just be like, nope, I'm breathing. And when it goes back, be like, nope. And so these are good skills to have. And so embarrassment is an opportunity to practice some of these self-love, these self-care techniques, these practices that are going to help us in other areas in our life. And just, again, remembering that embarrassment is something that happens to all of us, that is just an over concern with the perceptions of others, and we shouldn't care what others think anyway. But of course we do. And so when we do, what do we want to practice in that moment to lessen that hold, that external perception over us? Do we want to practice letting go? Do we want to practice our focus, being able to let go of our attachment to certain experiences? Do we want to practice our positive self-talk? Do we want to practice our journaling or having our conversations with ourselves or working something out? Like, what do you want to practice in that moment? See embarrassment as your opportunity to practice. In my case today, because I didn't want to get on the camera with my disfigurement, for lack of a better word, I didn't want anyone to see my disfigurement on film to be uploaded to YouTube. And, well, if you're listening to this on your podcast app, you can't see it, fortunately for me. But if you're on YouTube, you can see my disfigurement. And so for me, this was an opportunity to practice courage, to practice presence and showing up even when I don't want to. And so that's what I chose. And I did it anyway. And I am sitting with it. I'm going to sit with those feelings and hope that it inspires others to do the same as well. And so embarrassment is an opportunity, and what would you like to do with that? And it just makes you human and connected to all the other humans. And so give yourself a break. Don't be too hard on yourself. Definitely don't obsess about how this definitely proves you're like the worst creature in the world. Don't do any of that. And let this make you a kinder, more loving person. And that's it for today, dear humans. I know this episode is a little short today, but no one wants to linger on embarrassment, including myself. And so hopefully you still found some ideas about how to work with your next embarrassing experience. May you never have another, but should you, may you have some opportunities here and some techniques to take with you into that next moment. Otherwise, I hope you found the episode useful. And if you did and you would like to write into the show and let me know your thoughts or to share something that you're dealing with that you'd like me to make an upcoming episode about, I'd love to hear from you guys. You can contact me through any of my social media or by emailing me at Kory@KoryMstrom.com. And I will be back next week with another episode of A Well Cared For Human. And until then, please take good care of you.
This episode of A Well Cared For Human was written and produced by me, Kory Marie. The music was by Late Night Feeler and Esther Abrami. If you like what I'm doing here, please consider visiting my Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you get early ad-free access to the episodes, as well as a monthly patrons-only Q&A, bonus videos, and more. Not to mention that your Patreon support lets me know that you find value in the show and want it to continue. You can find me on Patreon by visiting www.patreon.com/Kory Marie. If you can't support the show financially, that is okay. You can still subscribe to the show, leave a review of the show, and recommend the show to your friends, not just the neurotic ones. All of this helps so much. And as always, thank you for listening.